Americans taking Japanese soldiers' body parts as war trophies, a group of women poisoning men to death, a German eugenics project for babies, a women guard at Auschwitz, and the infamous cannibalism incident. These are the stories I prepared for today's video, the video that was chosen by the people. I thank those who took the time to take part in the vote. And if you missed it, don't worry, there is a post right now that will decide the next video. With that out of the way, let's begin with the first story. In the early 20th century, Nagyrév was a small, seemingly tranquil village in rural Hungary. Yet, beneath its serene surface, a dark and sinister undercurrent began to take root. At the heart of this chilling story was a middle-aged midwife named Fazekas, who arrived in Nagyrév in 1911 with an air of mystery surrounding her. Her husband was absent, his whereabouts unknown, and her presence in the village seemed inconspicuous at first. However, between 1911 and 1921, Fazekas was imprisoned 10 times for performing illegal abortions but was consistently acquitted by judges who believed in her cause. In this era, Hungarian society was strict and conservative. Teenage brides had their future husbands chosen by their families, with no room for personal choice or rebellion. Divorce was socially forbidden, even in cases of abuse or alcoholism. These oppressive conditions created a pressure cooker, ready to explode at any moment. When World War I broke out, Nagyrév became a site for holding Allied prisoners of war. With many able-bodied Hungarian men sent to fight for Austria-Hungary, the prisoner of wars, men from diverse backgrounds were granted limited freedom within the village. This new demographic shift gave rise to clandestine affairs between local women and the prisoner of wars, causing significant tension when the Hungarian soldiers returned from the front lines. These soldiers, unwilling to accept their wives' infidelities, wished to restore the rigid social order of the past. The stage was set for chaos, and Fazekas had a solution that would forever change the village's history. Secretly, Fazekas began to persuade women who wished to escape their toxic marriages to resort to poison, using arsenic derived from boiling flypaper. She offered them a lethal means to rid themselves of unwanted husbands, lovers, and even family members who had become burdensome. This poisonous solution became a tempting escape route for those who felt trapped in their lives. As the killings increased, Nagyrév gained notoriety, eventually earning the ominous nickname, the Murder District. The first poisoning in Nagyrév occurred in 1911, the same year that Fazekas arrived in the village, although it was not directly linked to her. However, subsequent deaths began to follow a pattern, with husbands, children, and other family members falling victim to arsenic poisoning. As the number of murders grew, it became a grim trend, with an estimated 45 to 50 murders taking place over the 18 years that Fazekas lived in the district. Her connections within the village, including her cousin who served as the clerk responsible for filing death certificates, helped to keep the murders under wraps. 3 distinct stories emerged to explain how the angel makers were ultimately exposed. One account suggests that Sabo, one of the angel makers, was caught in the act by 2 visitors who survived her poisoning attempts. She then pointed fingers at others, eventually leading to Fazekas. In another version, a medical student from a neighboring town discovered high levels of arsenic in a body that washed up on a riverbank, prompting an investigation. Yet, according to Bela Bodo, a Hungarian-American historian and author, the truth came to light in 1929 when an anonymous letter was sent to a local newspaper, accusing women from the Tiszaújhely region of poisoning their family members. In response to the allegations, authorities exhumed dozens of corpses from the local cemetery, revealing a chilling pattern of arsenic poisoning. As a result, 34 women and 1 man were indicted, with 26 of the angel makers tried, including Fazekas. The trial was a sensational spectacle, culminating in the sentencing of 8 women to death, though only 2 were executed. Another 12 received prison sentences. During World War II, the Pacific Theater saw the United States military engaged in intense and brutal combat against the forces of Imperial Japan. Alongside the ferocity of these battles, a disturbing phenomenon emerged among some members of the American forces, the mutilation of dead Japanese service personnel. This grisly practice involved taking body parts as war souvenirs and war trophies, with teeth and skulls being the most common trophies, although other body parts were also collected and modified into various artifacts. The prevalence of trophy-taking was notable enough to garner significant attention in American media, with discussions and images appearing in magazines and newspapers. A particularly infamous incident involved President Franklin Roosevelt, who received a letter opener made from a Japanese soldier's arm, a gift from U.S. Representative Francis E. Walter. Roosevelt, alarmed by this barbaric gesture, ordered the letter opener returned, insisting on proper burial for the remains. This incident, widely reported, contributed to the negative perception of Americans in Japan, reinforcing the portrayal of American soldiers as deranged, primitive, racist, and inhuman. A Life magazine photo of a young woman with a skull trophy further fueled Japanese outrage, leading to widespread shock and condemnation. Despite the U.S. military's official prohibition on mutilation and the issuance of explicit guidance condemning such practices as early as 1942, incidents of body part collection persisted. The extent of trophy-taking became a significant concern, leading to ongoing efforts to repatriate Japanese remains. Nonetheless, enforcement was inconsistent, and many soldiers continued the practice throughout the war. A number of first-hand accounts from American servicemen attested to the taking of body parts from Japanese corpses. The reasons for this behavior varied: dehumanization of the enemy, racist attitudes, the harsh realities of war, and the perceived cruelty of the Imperial Japanese forces, which fueled a desire for revenge. These factors led to a breakdown in human decency, resulting in grotesque acts that violated military conduct. As a result, in September 1942, the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet issued orders explicitly prohibiting the use of any part of the enemy's body as a souvenir, warning that those violating this rule would face stern disciplinary action. Eugene Sledge, a U.S. Marine, recounted instances of his fellow Marines extracting gold teeth from wounded Japanese soldiers, with one instance resulting in a brutal, prolonged death for the Japanese victim. Donald Fall, another Marine veteran, mentioned that mutilation was driven by hatred and a desire for vengeance, describing how Marines, shocked by the mutilated bodies of their comrades, began to emulate similar behaviors by taking Japanese body parts as trophies. Or Marion, another Marine, shared a disturbing account of Marines beheading Japanese soldiers and placing their heads on poles as gruesome trophies to face the enemy. The behavior of trophy-taking wasn't limited to the Americans. The practice spread throughout the Pacific theater, with accounts of Moro Muslim guerrillas on Mindanao slicing the ears off Japanese soldiers and exchanging them with American guerrilla leader Colonel Fertig for bullets and cash. Additionally, Charles Lindbergh, the famed aviator, documented several instances of mutilation in his diary, noting the casual attitude of some American troops toward the brutal practice. The American public's response to these acts of brutality varied. In 1943, Life magazine published a photograph showing a severed Japanese head propped up below a tank turret during the Guadalcanal campaign. Although the magazine received letters of protest, suggesting shock at the cruelty, the editor's response indicated that war was inherently inhuman and unpleasant, warning against forgetting the brutal reality. Yet, this image received far fewer protest letters compared to an image of a mistreated cat in the same issue, indicating a troubling disparity in public outrage. As time passed, the collection of Japanese body parts continued to be a point of concern, with reports of trophy skulls and other body parts surfacing even after the war. Japanese remains repatriated from the Mariana Islands and Iwo Jima were often missing skulls and other body parts, hinting at the widespread nature of the practice. The collection of body parts as souvenirs continued to haunt American society, as these objects, initially accepted during the war, became viewed as unacceptable and inappropriate for display in the post-war period. The U.S. High Command eventually expressed alarm over the continued coverage of American mutilation of the dead in newspaper articles, leading to further condemnation and the eventual decline of the practice. Lebensborn Ewig, translating to Fount of Life, was a registered association established by the SS in Nazi Germany. Its primary objective was to increase the number of children born who met the Nazi criteria of racially pure and healthy Aryans, a core component of Nazi eugenics. The program was initiated by Heinrich Himmler, one of Adolf Hitler's closest advisors and a leading architect of the Holocaust. Lebensborn was conceived to promote Nazi ideology and counter declining birth rates in Germany. By providing welfare to unmarried mothers and supporting anonymous births, the organization encouraged women to give birth to racially valuable children. Abortion was legalized for disabled and non-Germanic children, but strictly punished otherwise. The organization's activities went beyond traditional welfare. It mediated the adoption of these children by families considered racially pure, primarily SS members and their families. The Cross of Honor of the German Mother was awarded to women who bore the most Aryan children, further incentivizing the program's goals. Lebensborn had its origins in Germany in 1935, but expanded into several occupied European countries with significant Germanic populations during World War II. It also served as a conduit for kidnapping children from other countries, assessing their racial purity and placing them with German families. This systematic approach was an attempt to Germanize Europe, often at the expense of displacing or even erasing the identity of children from occupied territories. Himmler himself outlined the organization's scope in a 1936 memo, emphasizing its role in supporting racially, biologically, and hereditarily valuable families. Lebensborn provided maternity homes for unmarried mothers and facilitated secret births to avoid social stigma. These facilities were established in confiscated houses, many of which had previously belonged to Jewish families. The organization also engaged in the adoption of children and often facilitated this process without informing the mothers that their children would be sent to Germany for adoption. As the Nazi regime expanded its territory, Lebensborn extended its reach into Norway, where German soldiers fathered children with Norwegian women. The organization's influence grew as it facilitated the transfer of these children to families in Germany. However, the program's darkest aspect was the systematic kidnapping of children from other countries, particularly Poland, Yugoslavia, and Norway. These children were subjected to tests to determine their suitability for Germanization, and those who were deemed undesirable were often sent to concentration camps or killed. Those considered suitable were placed with German families or sent to German boarding schools, where they were indoctrinated with Nazi ideology. After the war, evidence of Lebensborn's activities and the kidnapping of children emerged at the Nuremberg trials. However, despite the overwhelming evidence of widespread child abductions, the court concluded that the Lebensborn program was not directly responsible for these activities, attributing the kidnappings to other agencies or individuals. The exact number of children kidnapped by Lebensborn remains unclear due to the destruction of records during the war's final stages, but estimates range from tens of thousands to as high as 200,000. Lebensborn's impact on the children it sought to Germanize and their families was profound. After Germany's surrender, many of these children were left without a clear sense of identity, having been separated from their birth parents and indoctrinated with Nazi ideology. Survivors faced ostracization and abuse, especially in Norway, where children fathered by German soldiers were often bullied and persecuted. Despite the grim legacy of Lebensborn, some survivors have worked to uncover their origins and seek justice. The Norwegian government eventually offered compensation to some of the children, although attempts to deport them after the war had largely failed. In 2006, an open meeting in the German town of Wernigerode aimed to dispel myths about Lebensborn and encourage survivors to learn about their past. Irmgard Ilse Idegries, born on October 7, 1923, was one of the most notorious Nazi concentration camp guards during World War II. She worked at several infamous camps, including Ravensbrück, Auschwitz, and Bergen-Belsen, earning the nickname Hyena of Auschwitz for her cruelty toward prisoners. Her life and crimes reflect the dark and brutal reality of the Holocaust, and her trial and execution marked a significant moment in the history of justice against Nazi war crimes. Gries' early life was marked by tragedy and a difficult upbringing. She was the third of 5 children born to dairy workers Berta and Alfred Gries. Her mother died by suicide in 1936, drinking hydrochloric acid after discovering her husband's affair. Gries' father, who joined the Nazi Party in 1937, remarried 2 years later. Despite her father's opposition, Gries aspired to join the League of German Girls, a branch of the Hitler Youth for Girls. At 14, Gries left school and worked in various jobs, including on a farm and in a shop. Her path into the SS began in 1940 when she became an Offizieren, guard or overseer, at Ravensbrück, eventually transferring to Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1943. This career choice led to a rift with her father, who disapproved of her joining the SS Gefalge, leading him to expel her from the family home. Greece quickly gained notoriety for her ruthless behavior at Auschwitz, where she participated in prisoner selections for the gas chambers. Her role involved violent and degrading treatment of Jewish prisoners, often using a plated whip to beat them. In early 1945, as the war came to a close, Greece accompanied a prisoner evacuation transport from Auschwitz to Ravensbrück, then transferred to Bergen-Belsen in March of the same year. The British Army captured her on April 17, 1945. Greece was among 45 individuals accused of war crimes at the Belsen trial, held in Lüneburg, Lower Saxony. The trial lasted from September 17 to November 17, 1945, and was conducted under British military law, with charges derived from the Geneva Convention of 1929 regarding the treatment of prisoners. Survivors provided detailed testimony of Greece's cruel behavior, including the beating and murder of prisoners. Despite her youth, she displayed a chilling lack of remorse during the trial, earning her the additional moniker, the Beautiful Beast. After a 9-week trial, Greece was sentenced to death by hanging. She was one of only 3 female guards sentenced to death, alongside Johanna Bormann and Elisabeth Volkenrath, both of whom also worked at Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. Greece's execution was carried out at Hamelin Prison on December 13, 1945. British Army Regimental Sergeant Major Richard Anthony O'Neill, who assisted the executioner Albert Pierrepoint, described the scene as follows. Irma Greece stepped out. The cell was far too small for me to go inside, and I had to pinion her in the corridor. "Follow me," I said in English, and O'Neill repeated the order in German. At 9:34 a.m., she walked into the execution chamber, gazed for a moment at the officials standing round it, then walked on to the center of the trap, where I had made a chalk mark. She stood on this mark very firmly, and, as I placed the white cap over her head, she said in her languid voice, "Schnell." Greece's last words, a command to execute her quickly, highlighted her defiant attitude even in her final moments. The execution process involved a long drop hanging, and Greece was declared dead soon after. Although the exact time of her execution varied according to different sources, it was widely documented that she was the second to be hanged on that day, following Elisabeth Volkenrath and preceding Johanna Bormann. The Chichijima Incident, also known as the Ogasawara Incident, stands as one of the most horrific episodes of World War II, occurring in late 1944. It involved the capture, execution, and cannibalization of American airmen by Japanese soldiers on Chichijima, part of the Bonin Islands, located about 700 miles, 1,100 kilometers, south of Tokyo. In September 1944, 9 American pilots were shot down during bombing raids on Chichijima. While attempting to escape from their planes, the airmen found themselves on hostile ground. Only one of the 9, a young George H. W. Bush, managed to evade capture. The other 8, Lloyd Wolhoff, Grady York, James Jimmy Dye, Glenn Fraser Jr., Marvel Marv Mershon, Floyd Hall, Warren Earlvaughn, and Warren Hindenlang, were apprehended by Japanese forces. These captured airmen endured brutal beatings and torture before ultimately being executed on the orders of Lieutenant General Yoshio Tachibana. Following their execution, parts of the bodies of 4 airmen were cannibalized by Japanese officers. The full extent of this horrific event came to light only after the war, when Allied forces investigated Japanese war crimes. In August 1946, Tachibana and 11 other Japanese personnel were tried for the execution of U.S. Navy airmen and the cannibalization of at least one of them during August 1944. Despite the lack of specific military or international laws regarding cannibalism, the accused were tried for murder and prevention of honorable burial. Out of the 30 Japanese soldiers prosecuted for these crimes, 4 officers, including Lieutenant General Tachibana, Major Matoba, and Captain Yoshii, were found guilty and subsequently hanged. The remaining enlisted men and probationary medical officer Tadashi Teraki were released within 8 years. Vice Admiral Mori Kanizo, who commanded the Chichijima Air Base during the incident, believed that consuming human liver had medical benefits. Initially sentenced to life imprisonment, His sentence was later commuted to death after his subordinates were found guilty of slaughtering prisoners in a separate trial organized by the Netherlands for war crimes committed in the Dutch East Indies. The Chichijima Incident serves as a grim reminder of the depths to which human beings can sink during wartime. The barbaric acts committed by Japanese soldiers on Chichijima not only violated the basic principles of humanity, but also shattered the moral code that governs the conduct of war. The trial and execution of those responsible, while achieving a measure of justice, could never truly compensate for the suffering endured by the captured American airmen and their families. Thanks for watching until the end. Leave a like and subscribe so you can be notified when the next video drops.